You ask and I answer. Yes, I was aware of the National Gender-Based or GBV campaign. Or Gender-Based Violence, sorry, or GBV campaign. And to be honest, the fact that it's in our National Development Plan, that words like the patriarchy, male privilege and male power are coming anywhere near our National Development Plan worry me tremendously. And I can even tell you why, because we've already seen why it's a problem, right? If we look at genderjustice.org.za, and it's talking here, the second paragraph is discussing the challenges that they've had in rolling out gender-based violence campaigns and initiatives because of a lack of funding from government and so on, how the efforts have not really gone according to plan. Here's what they say. Second paragraph. One such effort towards effective coordination was the National Council on Gender-Based Violence, the NCGBV, a council created for the purpose of drafting, costing, and implementing a national strategic plan to combat GBV. Since its formation in 2012, it has been destabilized by political changes and lack of funding to execute its mandate. There has been no official word on its status since 2014, when former Minister of Women, Susan Shabangu, was appointed and the ministry failed to reconstitute it and provide an update on its status. Right, so that's only one small part of this, what's written on this page about GBV, the GBV plan in the country, the GBV campaign. But already you can see what my issue is, and this is where I say it's like BEE, this whenever you focus on a specific demographic to this extent, and the same was true for the apartheid government, okay, so it's the same stuff rolling through to now. And that's why I don't understand how we're falling prey to it in this country, because we've seen how that works. Like, even if you're one of those guys who's going to say, oh, well, at least apartheid could keep the lights on, it's like, well, yeah, but apartheid had no plan for a country with a population that ours has. So the long-term plans that they had were completely unsustainable. They sort of doomed the future of the country. Then the ANC rolled along, and what did they do? They instituted race-based, again, demographic-based policies. And we got BEE, which then smashed Eskom to shit. So the GBV thing is just going to be the next sort of step in that trend of failure on demographics-based policy making. Oh yeah, and this paragraph tells you that, because look at this. In this paragraph, it's told us that they built a council. They had a Minister of Women, whatever the hell that is. This council of theirs had to plan and implement, well, to plot and implement a national strategic plan. And then the whole thing fell apart because they lacked funding. So money either wasn't given to them, which means that we didn't have enough of it, or money was given to them and it just kind of slipped through the cracks to pay for maybe Minister of Woman's salary. I don't know, because I don't know what a Minister of Woman does. I don't even know if any woman, like how many women know that there's a Minister of Woman, or if there still is. I'm going to look that up. I have no idea if there's still a Minister of Woman. Sorry, I didn't do research on that particular point, but I am curious. Yeah, and then so as I said, the whole thing fell apart because of political intrigue and a lack of funding. So money didn't get to them, or it was stolen from them. And then the rest of it's the way everything else works. When you add more ministers and more politicians, you get more political messes. So adding more layers of bureaucracy to our government, our over-bureaucratized government, is not going to win. It's not going to help anybody. Yes, you'll be providing more government jobs, which I assume is what things like this are actually geared toward, is toward providing government jobs and giving ANC members somewhere where they can stick their families. Like... overpriced positions they can put their family members into. And the sad thing with this sort of activity is that it can create civil and political will toward change. Because obviously companies are incentivized to have their sort of annual corporate social initiatives, to get involved, to have some sort of... I mean, and most companies, look, let's be honest, most companies, especially big corporates, treat those sorts of things, those upliftment campaigns, they treat them like PR campaigns. But a PR campaign isn't that bad, because that means that brand is spreading awareness of the problem. And then the problem becomes trendy and everybody jumps on board trying to fix it. When you misdirect that energy, it can have disastrous results. It's where things like men are trash comes from. But it's also where you'll have then companies saying, well, we won't hire men. Because, oh, well, you know, men are evil monsters who beat women, so we have to only empower women. And that doesn't fix the problem either. So yeah, the gender-based, because it's demographic-based, it has a built-in enemy. In apartheid times, the built-in enemy were black people. When you talk about white monopoly capital, you're building in white people as the enemy. When you talk about Black Lives Matter, you're building white people in as the enemy. When you talk about gender-based violence and you use the terms that are being used, patriarchy and all these feminist terms, you're making men the enemy. And that's dangerous. You don't want to fix a problem by creating an enemy, not an actual, wars on terror and wars on poverty don't work. You have to fix problems by lifting people out of them, giving people the tools generally to lift themselves out of their problems. You can't leave people alone, but you also can't carry them. They need to be taught. It's the whole teach a man to fish thing. People need to learn how to catch their own fish. Things like gender-based violence don't help with that. It encourages the state to pamper women, putting them into a state of dependence, which we have too many people in this country who are already in a state of dependence on the government. A government that can barely stand, by the way. That's not something like rather put your faith in a good man than in your government. But the government has allowed the country to deteriorate to the point where there aren't as many good men as there should be. And now it's using that against everyone, because there's not as many good women as there should be either. I hate to tell you, ladies, but some of you were also shit. You can go on about, men beat their wives and men rape, and it's like, yeah, men do some horrifying things. But women can be vicious, dude. And I'm not just talking about emotional manipulation and psychological warfare, which you're better at. I'm talking about things like poisoning your children, or neglecting them, abandoning them in dumpsters, right? Everyone has the capacity to be a monstrous animal. Now I'm going to talk about SPA, because SPA's got their own little gender-based violence campaign that they recently launched. If you're not from South Africa, SPA is just a local retail chain. One of the bigger ones. It's I think it's mid-range with regards to its cost, the affordability to the consumer. So it's a step below. It's like the true middle-class shopping place, I suppose. It's a step below Woolworths, but a step above Checkers. I think Pick and Pay is on the same level. I don't really know, to be honest. I'm sounding terribly snobby, and I'm not actually as informed of these particulars as I'm trying to sound like I am. But anyway, point being, SPA has its own little gender-based violence campaign, because obviously it was just like with Black Lives Matter in the States, where all the corporates jumped onto it, and that's where you've got to go, okay, well, how legitimate is this? I mean, these dudes are just doing it for PR, obviously. And my trade, I work in marketing. I'm a marketing copywriter. I can tell you that that's all this is to most corporates. It's just PR for them. They don't give the issue any thought. And actually, if you look at SPA stuff, so they've got little physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, they've got little descriptions of each and how each is a form of gender-based violence, which I already have a problem with, because you're muddying the waters at this point. Physical abuse can be obviously a form. Well, gender-based violence can take the form of physical abuse, rather. And likewise, I would say sexual abuse is always gender-based. I think they're fair there. And then psychological abuse, again, this is what I mentioned earlier, and gender-based violence, I would say, can take the form of psychological abuse, but it's a difficult one, because the words that a person uses will imply that it's gender-based, but the intent behind those words might not be gender-based. So if you're fighting with your girlfriend and you call her a bitch, the fact that you're angry isn't necessarily based on her gender. You're fighting her because she's wronged you in some way, or because you've been betrayed in some way, or whatever the hell. The word you use is gendered. You're calling her a bitch. But if it was a dude and you were fighting with your friend, you'd call him an arsehole. Isn't that now also gender-based violence? Because you wouldn't call a woman an arsehole. You see, that's where it gets, I suppose it's verbal, but verbal, it falls under psychological. So, and also, again, I think that if you could get accurate numbers, if it were possible to accurately measure how many members of the human race is engaged in some form of domestic abuse against their partner, because this is really what this is about. They're calling it gender-based violence. It's really about domestic violence. And if they called it that, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Because to me, the people you're actually protecting with gender-based violence, with domestic violence, is children. And if you call it domestic violence, I think it becomes apparent. And you're protecting the family and the idea of the family. I think that's important. Just protecting the idea of the woman is detached from everything else. I don't think it's healthy. And anyway, as I said, if you could accurately measure how many people on the planet are abusing how many people, and you included these three, so physical, sexual, and psychological, I think that we would all be very surprised as to how close the numbers are between men and women. I think a lot of women, especially when you're including psychological abuse. So again, it's the circumstances, I think, in which a person is placed that will create the abuse. And none of this, if it's a corporate campaign, this is why I don't like I hate that brands do this. I hate it's become the thing, this brand activism. I just think it's incredibly irresponsible because brands actually don't know anything, and the marketing companies or the marketing department that they've hired to do these things, because that's generally who comes up with the ideas, they don't know any. They know less than nothing. Sorry, but a lot of marketing departments are full of idiots. And we've seen that by some of the marketing campaigns that have resulted in like there was that one recently. It was the hair one, and it was comparing damaged, crappy hair to nice, pure hair, and it was a black woman's hair compared to a white woman's hair. And it's like, guys, I know that's not what you were trying to say, but the optics, that was just really, really. So yeah, think about that when you're think about that when you're considering who's behind these grand campaigns that these big corporates enter, these grand socially aware campaigns that these big corporates enter into. Right, so here's what the CEO at Spa, so Graham O'Connor, who is so far removed from the average South African that I don't actually know where he gets the balls to speak on any topic that affects the average South African. I mean, we're talking about, I think he earns like 70,000 Rand a day or something stupid like that. I think he's in the bottom end, as I recall, of the CEOs in the retail CEOs in this country. But I mean, he's the bottom end of like some top 10 people or something. It's ridiculous. He's going to tell us about anyway. So here's what he says. We also acknowledge that the term of violence against women and children is a passive construction with no active agent in the sentence. This assumes that bad things just happen to women and children. We need to recognize that the silent active agent in the sentence is men. While not all men abuse women and children, we need to acknowledge that the abuse doesn't just happen, and that it is generally perpetrated by men. And I just want to strangle him, right? Because factually he's true, obviously. Throughout history, most violence has been committed by men. Wars are fought by men. Vast majority of murders are committed by men. Vast majority of bar brawls are engaged in by men. Vast majority of boxing matches and MMA matches are fought by men. So on and so forth. Men are predominantly, and yes, criminally as well. Vast majority of sort of any physical crime is committed by men. Fraud probably as well, but I do think women will catch up there. But anyway, the point is I agree with him that men commit the vast. But that's sort of why it actually makes sense that there is no active agent in the phrase violence against women and children. Because unless you have a solution to the problem that is men, you have to consider that violent men are always going to be an environmental problem. That's the way it is. If the environment is too unsettled, it's too disruptive, it's too something, you're going to have an increase in violent men. But even if the environment is perfect, you're going to have a minority of violent men who are violent for no rational or reasonable justification. But then the reason you leave an active agent out of the phrase, or should leave an active agent out of the phrase violence against women and children, is because you really don't want to be scapegoating someone, because scapegoating entire demographics of people is always a bad idea. But that's why CEOs of Spa and other retail, because these people, you can't assume somebody knows something just because they could afford to hire a marketing agency, right? And that they own a bunch of shops. The dude's rich beyond my dreams, obviously, and that's great. He knows things that I will never know. But this is not an area that he's got any knowledge in, or has even really looked into. I don't think, not personally. And already the term violence against women and children, because it's absent men, you assume that the missing word is men, which is why I don't even agree with that phrase until South Africa gets a better handle on our violence in general. Then we can start to get granular. But when you say, in a country with a murder rate like ours, I think it's like 30 something, I think it's 31. I think it's 31 murder rate. I think the murder rate among men in South Africa is 50. I think it's 34 murder rate flat, and I think against men it's 51. I'll look for the numbers. But yeah, men in this country, if there's a war against women, men are losing it. And that's why we shouldn't look at it in those terms, because I don't think we should look at it in the terms of, oh, so many men are being killed. It's so many people are being killed. I know I said that the last time, I will say it every time I discuss this particular topic. And I think the guys at Spa and every other corporate who jumps onto this particular bandwagon, maybe when they're sitting around their boardroom tables and they're busy deciding for the year, which social initiative or shall we promote this year? Because that's really what it is. Most of the money will go into promotion and making sure people know what they did rather than into actually what they were supposed to be doing. And when they're sitting around their boardroom tables ticking off which of the trendiest social movements they should tick to engage in that year, maybe they should be looking at more generalized community upliftment. Draw attention to the fact that a lot of South Africans are not actually in a position to worry about an issue as granular as gender-based violence, and maybe their upliftment should be facilitated. Because again, it shouldn't just be handouts. You need to give people the tools to dig themselves out of their own messes. But we do have to understand in this country that government, the current one and the previous one, are responsible for disproportionate amounts of human suffering. So they do need a helping hand. I just don't think, once again, that you get to that place by helping one demographic. I think you get to that place by helping people who are afflicted by a particularly pervasive problem. Poverty is pervasive, and so is unemployment. Fix those. Don't fix them by gender, fix them across the board. Worry about gender when you've got the numbers in a better place. Because then you're just making up the numbers even better. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Hit like, hit subscribe. I will see you next time. Cheers.